Sources. Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about the 11-year-old serial killer, Mary Bell. In 1968, an 11-year-old girl named Mary Bell, known as May to her family, from Scotswood, Newcastle, was convicted of the manslaughter of two little boys. Her name became synonymous with child crime and she was described as evil. Mary's crimes were evil, but she was desperately failed during her childhood, not just by her parents and those around her, but by the very system in which she found herself incarcerated. When you're 11 years old, there's a lot to be thinking about. Like how the transition to secondary, middle school is going to go. Or if lunch is going to be disgusting at school today. What you're not thinking about is murder. Except if you're Mary Bell. Mary Bell, on the other hand, not only thought about murder, but acted on those thoughts. Mary Flora Bell was born on May 26, 1957 to Betty Bell, name of Cricket, described as a 17-year-old prostitute. The family lived on one of the roughest roads, White House Road, in Scotswood, which was referred to as an area of extreme deprivation, that housed a larger than average amount of criminality. Her father, Billy Bell, was a petty criminal and drunkard who was well known to police, and who was later arrested for armed robbery. Mary was conditioned by her dysfunctional surroundings from an early age. When Mary was born, her mother Betty's response was, "Get that thing away from me." She was eager to drop Mary off with relatives whenever possible, and even once tried to give her to a woman who had been denied an adoption. Betty's sister, who had followed Betty, managed to get Mary back from the woman. Her mother wouldn't allow men to abuse Mary from the age of just 4, and due to the lack of space at home, Mary was exposed to what went on between Betty and her clients, which it was claimed also involved sadomasochism. She was also exposed to her father's drunken behavior and violence. All that alongside the sexual violence she witnessed between others became the norm in her young mind. Norma Joyce Bell, no relation to Mary, lived next door. She was 2 years older but less intelligent. Norma followed Mary, and was easily led by her, and together they became a pair that other children would avoid, through fear. On Saturday 11th of May 1968, Mary and Norma took a 3-year-old boy to buy some sweets. Later that day he was found wandering in the street, dazed and bleeding. Although the police became involved, no further action was taken. On Sunday 12th of May 1968, a local mother complained to police that Mary had attempted to strangle her daughter, Pauline, in a sand pit. Pauline told how Norma had pinned her down, and Mary had grabbed her around her throat. She then proceeded to fill Pauline's mouth with sand, until Norma let go and moved away, seemingly in fear of what Mary was doing. Pauline was able to get free and run home. Again, police took no further action. On Saturday 25th May, 4-year-old Martin had been playing with his friends in the local derelict houses. At 5 p.m. a neighbor alerted Martin's mother to the fact Martin had seemingly had an accident. When she reached the derelict house, there was a group of people stood outside and a crying man was holding Martin in his arms. Martin was pronounced dead on arrival at Newcastle Hospital. Martin had been found dead in an upstairs room of the house, and police were called in to investigate. The pathologist was unable to reach a conclusion on his death. On Monday 27th May, police attended a call to a break-in at a local nursery, where they found 4 pieces of paper. The words scrawled on one said, "I murder so that I may come back," and on another, "We murder. Watch out," and on a third, "We did murder Martin Brown." The notes were initially dismissed by police as a sick game. On Wednesday 31st July, 3-year-old Brian joined other children, watching the demolition of houses in Rat Alley. At some point Mary picked him up and, along with Norma, took him to play at a nearby patch of wasteland. That was the last time Brian was seen alive. That night, police descended upon the wasteland where little Brian had been found murdered. His body was spread-eagled and half-naked. Snippets of his hair had been cut, there were unusual puncture wounds to his legs which had been caused after death, and the perpetrator had attempted to mutilate his penis. The police quickly ascertained from the evidence presented to them that the perpetrator was young. A post-mortem concluded that Brian had been strangled and the wounds of his legs were an attempt to leave initials on his body. In addition, a few days later another mark would become evident on his belly. where it looked like someone had tried to scratch the letter M into his skin with a razor blade. A pair of broken scissors lay nearby. Due to similarities to the death of Martin, the police linked both deaths, and announced they were looking for a child murderer. The community was in a state of panic, and the police were looking for an answer. They started questioning all the children in the area. 2 children in particular seemed to be acting very strange. Norma Bell, age 13, seemed excited by the murder, and the detective noted that throughout questioning she kept smiling, as though it were a huge joke. 11-year-old Mary Bell also reacted oddly, and was being very evasive. As their investigation continued, Mary continued to act strangely. At one point, she claimed she had seen another 8-year-old boy with Brian, the day he was murdered. She claimed she had seen the 8-year-old hit Brian, and that at one point she saw him playing with a pair of scissors. But, the boy she pointed the finger at had been at the airport the afternoon of Brian's murder, and by mentioning the pair of scissors, Mary had implicated herself. The pair of scissors had been confidential evidence. If Mary knew about them, then she had to know something about the murder. To police, it was becoming clear that one or both girls were involved in the murder. The day that Brian Howe was buried, Mary was observed by a detective standing outside of the Howe's house. The detective was horrified to see Mary, watching while the coffin came out, laughing and rubbing her hands together. He decided something needed to be done immediately, before another child died, and so he questioned Mary's friend, Norma Bell, again before Brian's funeral. This time, what Norma told the police shocked them. Though both of their stories would change over time, the story that Norma told police the day of Brian's funeral was enough for the police to pick Mary up immediately. According to Norma, Mary had told Norma that she killed Brian, and she had brought her to the boarded-up house afterwards to show her his body. Mary described to Norma how she had squeezed his neck and strangled him. She said she had enjoyed it. When the police questioned Mary, she was still evasive, and admitted to nothing. She refused to make a statement, and accused Norma of lying and trying to get her into trouble. Mary was let go at first, but after additional information provided by Norma, she was brought back into the station, and finally admitted to being there when Brian was killed, but she pushed all the blame onto Norma for the murder. Nonetheless, both of the girls were arrested and charged for the murder. It also came out that Mary had been overheard by other children screaming, "I am a murderer," and pointing to the house where Brian was found, saying "That's where I killed." Mary was known to tell tall tales, and her claims weren't taken seriously. During her incarceration while awaiting trial, Mary made many strange comments to the women working as guards, including, "I like hurting little things that can't fight back." Mary's lack of emotions, unresponsiveness, and strange behavior led psychiatrists to label her as psychopathic. On 5th of December 1968, the trial of Mary and Norma began at Newcastle Assizes. Due to the ages of the defendants, both the BBC and ITV banned the reporting on their news bulletins, and in order to make the girls more comfortable, the judge asked the solicitors to sit alongside the girls. During the trial both girls claimed they were innocent and both blamed each other. Mary showed no emotion, until she was cross-examined, and became very upset when asked if she had attempted to strangle a pigeon. Throughout the 9-day trial, Mary was astute and sharp at answering questions, whereas it seemed Norma was very unsure and seemed to have been coerced into her actions. Mary Bell and Norma Bell were both charged with 2 counts of manslaughter. Both girls testified during the trial, implicating each other in the crimes. It was noted, however, that the girls still seemed to have a strange bond between them. Court-appointed psychologists testified that Mary displayed classic symptoms of psychopathy, and therefore was not completely coherent, nor responsible for her actions. On December 17, 1968, the girls were given their verdicts. Norma was acquitted of all charges against her. Mary was convicted of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility, and due to the psychological assessment presented at trial. She was to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which is basically an indefinite sentence of imprisonment. Nearly 9 years later, in 1977, Mary would briefly escape from the adult prison she had just been transferred to, but was quickly caught. Despite that, she was released from prison after serving just 12 years, in 1980. She was 23 years old. She was granted anonymity to start a new life, under a new name. Mary gave birth a daughter in 1984. There was great concern about whether or not Mary should be allowed to keep her child. After all, she had murdered 2 children. In the end, Mary was allowed to keep and raise her daughter. At one point, after Cries Unheard was published, and it was discovered that Mary Bell had been paid for telling her side of the story, there was a media uproar. Local law officials, who had been made aware of Mary's whereabouts, revealed Mary's local identity, and there was a large outcry from the local populace. Her daughter had not been aware of her mother's past. Mary went to court, and was granted lifelong anonymity for both her and her daughter. The killing of 2 small boys by 1 young child raised questions about why this had happened, and made society look at the way children were treated. Environmental causes were blamed, such as her dysfunctional and neglected home life. The trial raised questions about the suitability of children appearing in an open Crown court, and their inability to understand what was happening in such surroundings, thus causing an unjust environment. On a more local level, the neighborhood changed in so much, as parents were far more conscious of their children's safety. Rather than walking to school alone, children were taken by parents. What do you guys think about this? Comment it down below. I'd love to hear your side about this case.